Well, we're here today to discuss the House of Lords. Now, when I was younger, I didn't have a clue what the House of Lords was, what it did, and I imagine that lots of lords and ladies had castles and kingdoms. What is this place, and what exactly do you do here?
Well, I think that your perception is quite a popular one. The Lords is not that well known. What it is the second chamber of Parliament. It's a subordinate chamber, it's not elected, it's appointed. It does work that adds to the work of the Commons, it complements the work of the Commons by doing a lot of detailed investigative work by members who are drawn from a whole range of backgrounds, many of whom certainly don't own castles and who are not that well paid.
And Lord Tyler, what's the background for you, and how did you get into it?
Well, I was a member of the House of Commons. I was an MP for many years, and I think what's very important to demonstrate is that we are very different. In the House of Commons, every single person there is representing a constituency. Even ministers, the Prime Minister is representing a bit of the country. Here we don't represent any individual bit of the country, but we try and represent the whole nation, and that's a very important role. But the big other difference, of course, is that in recent years, the House of Lords has not had a majority of the government's supporters, or indeed of any one party. So that every time an issue comes to the House of Lords, and I hope this will always be the case, ministers have to persuade in the debate rather than just expect there are enough supporters behind them always to make sure they get their way.
Okay. And it's interesting because for our question this month, or rather throughout the month of April, we're going to be asking why bother voting? Now, in this dilemma with the House of Lords, whereby no one's elected really, and they're all just appointed, how does that come across as fair and democratic, Lord Norton?
Well, it adds to what the other House can do, because the Commons is the elected chamber, it speaks for the country, and it's through the House of Commons that government is accountable to the people. So the Lords doesn't duplicate that. So what it does is seek to do tasks that the House of Commons perhaps doesn't have the time, the political will, or the resources to undertake. And to some extent that's why it's not that well known, because the sort of work we're doing is not high profile, it's not the grand debate between the parties. It's fairly mundane, quite often backbreaking, detailed work that needs to be done, so it adds value to the process.
Anything to add to that at all?
Well, I'm disappointed that actually we're not taken more seriously. And of course the reason why the House of Lords isn't taken particularly seriously, especially by ministers, is they can always say, oh, well, they don't represent anybody, they're unelected, they don't have a mandate. And one of the reasons I think why we are going to have to move on to having a system which at least makes most of the members of the second chamber responsible to the wider electorate is because, unfortunately, ministers can otherwise dismiss the very important work, very serious good work that's done in this place by saying, oh, well, they don't really matter.
But on the other hand, the ministers have to take the House seriously, partly because the government doesn't have a majority, partly because of the background of the members. They quite often are expert in the area, so the minister can't actually dismiss them, so at least ministers have to listen, they've got to respond. And you do get quite a good dialogue in the chamber, and again, ironically, part of the reason why it works is because we're not that well known outside, there's not a lot of coverage. It's much easier for ministers to respond to some extent, make concessions, knowing it's not going to be in the press the next day as some government U-turn or some change of tack. So it makes for a much more, if you like, friendly, more interactive environment between ministers and members.
Which brings us to Lords of the Blog, I guess. Now, tell us about this. I mean, how did it come about? Who's in charge of it? And what exactly do you do with it?
Well, one of our colleagues, Clive Soley, Lord Soley, who's had a blog for some time while he was an MP, came up with a very clever idea that perhaps a few of us might pilot a blog at which we would contribute to on a regular basis, and we did it for 6 weeks, I think, before we were allowed to go live, while we got used to it. It's quite clever, but it's also quite difficult to do it right. Philip's much more expert at it than me, because what we've tried to do, of course, is to stimulate ideas and responses. We're not just telling people, we want the response back. And just over the last few days, the responses have been fascinating, very interesting. And I've been in this business a long time. They're not the usual suspects. They're not people we know. They're not all Hull students. They're people that we know from all over the country, have not been particularly involved in the past, admit to not knowing very much about what goes on here, who are now responding to what we're saying and doing and asking very important and useful questions.
So what sort of questions and people are these? I mean, what do you tend to find?
Well, they're quite disparate. I mean, some are comments, some are actually genuine questions. I mean, you do get your serial commentators. But it is very valuable, because I know research has shown that with most blogs, there are no comments on them, whereas we're more or less getting several comments for each post that we do. But some of the questions are straightforward, factual questions, inviting us to say more, for example, about what we do on a day-to-day basis, and some are just factual about particular aspects of the house itself and its work.
I've heard that just within 2 or 3 days the website received over 4,000 unique visitors. That's very impressive just for a blog. I mean, in terms of, you know, where would you be if the blog didn't exist? I mean, how in the old days, so to speak, how would you have actually reached out to people to let them know what was going on? I mean, has it been effective?
It has been most effective, but it's building on other work. We have an excellent Lord Speaker here who is very, very good, and both of us have been trying to give some informal advice on how she can promote the work of the House and what she does. And she's most interested and most effective at that. We go to schools. We've been recording, some of us, for YouTube, brief little extracts of what we are doing here. Whether that's going to be effective will be very interesting to see. I'm not sure how well we've done it. But I think it's very important to emphasize that back in the days when there were reports in some of the broadsheet newspapers of what happened in the House of Lords, actually very few people read them. But today, people can access what's going on in this place electronically far more easily than ever was available through Hansard or whatever like that. So I don't despair of people being well informed about what's going on. The Hansard Society audit of political engagement showed that people didn't think they knew very much, but actually I think they probably know more and are more interested in the issues we talk about than perhaps 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago.
And what the blog does is it complements the range of things that Paul's referred to. There is a recognition on the part of the House it shouldn't be insular, it should be informing people as wide as possible. So there's a lot of material that's being generated, that's being made available to schools, to visitors, and quite a lot being put on the web through things like the Lord Speaker's website as well as the House of Lords website. So it really complements that, but in a way that adds, because the blog is meant to provide insights, information that you wouldn't get from the normal run of things. And as Paul has touched upon as well, invite response from those people who are actually reading it so that we get some feedback. We're quite happy to hear from people. It's just that the mechanism hasn't always been there, other than people occasionally putting pen to paper and writing. And hopefully what the blog will do will open us up to a range of people who would never have thought of getting in touch before. And
Lord Tyler, I mean, you know, will the blog become for everyone? Will every peer, you know, use the blog, and is it the future?
Well, I think we're now 10. We were 9.
10?
Yes, we were 9. I think we've gone up to 10, so it's like 10 lords are leaping. You've got to start somewhere. I think actually if everybody was involved in it, it would start to be very difficult to manage, and I think people who were clicking on would find it difficult. As it is at the moment, it's a cross-section of all parties and no party, people of all ages and backgrounds and expertise and so on, so I think that's rather good. But the point that Philip Norton is making is critical. It is interactive. It's no longer saying, we are going to tell you what's going on. It's saying, look, here are some interesting issues. You may be interested. Let's hear what you think. And the comeback, the response is fantastic. It's very, very interesting, very thoughtful. And that's a good sign. I think it's about time MPs caught up with us.
Absolutely.
And what it may encourage, and certainly encourages me, is actually for individual members of the House to think about doing their own blog.
Yes.
If more did it, then you get a much better flavour of the House. And this is experimental. We'll see how it goes. But certainly on the basis of experience now I've had and got used to it, you know, I'm tempted to start my own blog.
And my lords, can you remind me of the website address?
It's lordsoftheblog.net.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much indeed for taking part. Thank you.